the way you build teams in a crisis is really different. They're higher for culture and higher for diversity over experience and capabilities. Placing someone is way more expensive than working with them to make it a great place to work.
Welcome to the Quotient podcast, where we focus on three key areas: building companies, mastering leadership, and prioritizing your people. Whether you're a CEO, investor, or somebody looking to lead teams, every single episode is packed full of insights from international guests who share their experiences and advice to help you win. Let's listen in. Hey, Pavan, how are you? So good to see you, man.
Good, thank you, Rohit. Yeah, you too, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed you in Auckland. Now that you moved to Wellington, you traded for more windy places than the quiet and serene Auckland, I would say.
Yeah, windy and hilly. San Fran, actually.
Oh, that's true. I never thought of it that way. I haven't been to Wellington in a while, but I know that at least before winter arrives, you've got some patches of calm weather that you can enjoy. That'd be good. I'm really excited that you're joining us and joining our listeners, because I've obviously been privileged to see you grow and develop over the years, especially in the New Zealand scene. And I know your experiences are beyond New Zealand and much broader. And so why don't you give us a little bit of a background on what you've been up to over the years, and with the more recent role, for which congratulations, as CEO at Flick. I'd love to hear your background, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like you, I started out life as in engineering school in Auckland, and I have the privilege of graduating from university twice in the middle of a recession. So the first time was in the .com boom and bust cycle, where I had not one but two graduate roles kind of disappear overnight. And the second time was in the middle of the GFC, where I did my, during which I was at business school. And both those times, I think the shifting paradigm around the world that the world was experiencing, I kind of benefited from, but it's not like I was looking for opportunities, but I basically rode the wave of creating something new out of nothing for myself and the companies that I worked for. So I started out life as an employee number one in a startup, well, long before where New Zealand even had a startup ecosystem. So you ended up, developing software, being on the phones with customers to the US, and then jumping on a plane every so often, shipping software on CDs even, and charging people $100 US per year, even before the word software as a service was coined. This is the CD-ROM era, right?
Yeah.
And it was photography software aimed at mom and dad studios that kind of shot in the weekend, large weddings and such, and then kind of managed their studios during the week. And we gave them a tool where they could manage, shoot, and sell, hundreds of images of brides and grooms and weddings and family portraits kind of thing, using software. And this was at a time where Kodak was shrinking as a company and eventually went bust.
Yeah.
And I learned so much. And what I learned is, as an engineer, you really had to have your eyes and ears open and listen to customer feedback, and then inform your product roadmap. So that was ingrained in my mind from very early on, coming out of engineering school. In particular, back in those days, engineering schools didn't have those streams of product-led thinking that we do now, right? So very much, this is how you build things, and this is how you safeguard against risk. But actually, what we now know is taking risk well is part and parcel of any scale-up company. So that was the first experience. And then the second experience, it was me joining a global consulting company, helping basically large banks in London comprehend what technology is going to do to their customer experience, and helping banks launch products where it would allow their customers to engage with the bank on mobile effectively. That's what I did. And post GFC, this world really accelerated, right? Because customers were not only didn't only want safe banks, they wanted banks that could serve them in a new way and get their trust back. So that was a fascinating place to live in. And that's when I transitioned my career from being a technology-led leader to being a leader within, as you mentioned, a tech-enabled kind of setup. And one thing which stands true in both those experiences is, the way you build teams in a crisis is really different to the way you build teams in a steady state environment. And in the first instance, during the dot-com bubble and burst, I was on the receiving side of great leaders who built teams in a crisis, and we benefited. And the next two times, I've played a role as a leader as well. So that's really fascinating.
Which one do you like more? Crisis building or in steady state? Which one do you enjoy more?
Well, I had one of my team members pull me aside in week 2 of lockdown and COVID. And he told me, Pav, I had no idea you had this side of you. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, for the last 3 years, I've been working with you in the good times. And you leave me alone. You guide me. You push me to be my very best. But what I've seen in the last 3 weeks in lockdown is you've basically taken this company by the throat and you're pulling us out of the crisis. And what we were working on then is basically developing a whole bunch of COVID related technologies, digital technologies. This is when I was chief executive at Rush Digital, and we convinced the New Zealand government to partner with us to scale out COVID tracing apps and software platforms to the whole country in a matter of weeks. And that not only rescued the company, but it sort of glued the business together to achieve more things after that moment. So I really enjoyed that, but I wouldn't recommend it for years on end. That energy lasts for weeks and months, but definitely not years.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's really well put, because developing or building or operating in crisis, it is exhausting. But as you said, it was a mission, right? And then the mission probably brought the team together. But talk to us a little bit about that. I'm going to take a detour on this, because that work that you did for the New Zealand government was very pivotal for the country, not just for your team, but from a country perspective. Because you guys and your firm and your team, developed that QR code, if I'm not mistaken, or was part of building that QR code, which then eventually got rolled out. Talk to us a little bit about that journey and how that got developed. Any fun stories that came along the way as it relates to your team, getting behind it, because obviously there was not all small, medium businesses get to have such a vision, mission-based mandate. It's hopefully once in a lifetime for when it comes to COVID type thing. How did you guys, go through that? What was that journey like for your company and your team members?
Yeah, so I have a dear friend in Italy, and I was on a WhatsApp thread with him on it, and he basically sent me a picture of a park near his house, which was really empty, and it was a Saturday morning. He's like, look out there. I'm like, I can't see anything, because that's the point. Normally this park is busy in central Milan on a Saturday morning where families are going. I'm like, what's happening? Because we've gone into lockdown. I'm like, huh. And this is the day that, the world woken up. There's Chinese virus. As the world knew it back then, coronavirus was actually a global problem, because Milan had gone into lockdown. And this was, I believe, mid-February of 2020. And I called a friend up, and he's a futurist thinker. And he came up to Auckland, and we started whiteboarding, hey, what sort of things we could do together in terms of technologies. And through his network, we got a whole bunch of global public health experts on the line, and people who received OBEs and such.
Crazy.
And literally we started our product engineers, product managers, and some public health experts and interviews through that sort of a lean startup way. We got learning about the problem and what we might face at scale, in not only in this country, but across the globe, and how pandemics actually work. And, things like our values and all of those things were kind of basically drinking through the fire hose. And long story short, by the time we had our first set of prototypes, the New Zealand government only had 2 people looking at digital contact tracing in the whole government.
Yeah.
And we basically devised a plan of, we're going to ship some software daily. And we, at 1 p.m. every day, we had a Zoom call, and we told them we're going to be shipping, and we'll tell you tomorrow what we've built and what we've learned. And this call went from 2 people to, by day 15, government ministers and 30, 40 people joining the call.
Amazing.
And then we went into lockdown, and about 3 or 4 weeks later, and the government, we probably should run an RFP process to choose a vendor or a partner to help us build something. And they ran a process, and we happened to win it because of the progress that we showed them. We still had to go through a very rigorous procurement process. And in 6 weeks after this, we shipped just as New Zealand was coming out of the first lockdown. And the software, we kept building on it, but it didn't get used in anger, even though it was the number one downloaded app for months. It didn't get used in anger until the second lockdown. And we actually, a year and a bit later, when we had mass community spread and very low vaccination.
Yeah.
And my proudest moment is in that 6-week period, we sent 200,000 notifications to people to say, hey, you've been exposed to the virus, go get tested, isolate until you get positive. And we actually clamped the Delta spread through that process, and then helped drive the vaccination message up through the app as well. And what I haven't told you is between that day and that day, I got a call from someone in the UK and said, hey, can you jump on a Zoom call at 9 p.m. your time? And we jumped on the Zoom call, and there was about 15 people from the UK government, and they said, we want you to deploy your technology in the UK. So we actually scaled up to 60 million people using our tech in the UK as well.
Amazing.
Yeah. And some of that modeling has been published in the Nature Science Journal to have saved about 10,000 lives in the UK, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah. That's, first of all, congratulations. Like that is not something that most humans get to say, which is, like saving lives and having a direct impact on people and countries and communities, because it was an unknown thing at the time. And I think what you've just highlighted is a classic case of getting ahead of the problem, which is while nobody saw the problem coming in the way it came, I think, preempting that this could be a problem at scale allowed you to truly deliver something. And I think that's where I believe that, when you have talent and people around you who can, like you did with your friend and then his network and then beyond, it just creates a really amazing energy to help solve problems, because no one person can solve problems. It's a team effort. And I think this example exemplified that, which is how, you not only got ahead of it, but then also how you were able to collaborate. And again, it's a mission driven, approach. So kudos to you and your team for being able to do this. One question, one thing that sort of pops up as you talk about a lot of what you've shared with us so far is, you're very focused on experience, whether it was your customer service experience and then what taught you from what on your technical days to the way you now approaching product. And even in this example that you gave as to the adoption was slow because it was the experience of the people, the mindset. So a lot of that sort of speaks to human factors, right? That it's the human that you've been dealing with, and the technologies that you're developing and leading the development of are impacting people, even to the role that you're in now with the company you're with. It's ultimately, it might be a B2B, but it could be B2B2C or B2C. But acronyms aside, it's about people. And so that obviously has required you, I'm guessing, a lot of amazing people around you, as an example that you shared. How do you find them? How do you find talent? Because a lot of people listening to you, man, I would love to do that. I have amazing ideas, or I'm already working on a business, or I have a small business. But you know what? At the end of the day, people are the fuel. And how did you do it, Pavan? What's your secret sauce in finding great people around you? Especially in a setting where talent is not abundant, right? New Zealand economy and New Zealand as a country is limited in its talent availability. So how did you find them? How did you motivate them? Tell us all your secrets if you can.
Yeah, first, I come from a place where I recognize that nobody's perfect. Even when we look at some of the great founders and great leaders and great people that work for them, we all have holes, right? So keep your expectation of the person high once you hire them, but don't think you're going to hire the unicorn person, right? Because there's no such thing. So then you go to, okay, how do you nurture them? How do you create the environment where they can be their best self and they can actually surpass their own expectations of themselves? And then you create those conditions. So I'm very much in the camp that actually hire for culture and hire for diversity over experience and capabilities, and then create an environment which they can build that capability themselves, and be very open and honest, that this is what the growth looks like, and then create the conditions for growth. And occasionally when you do hire really experienced people who have done it before, their number one KPI is to succession plan themselves. So you can give them the reach into something else that they haven't done before and make sure they find the next group of people that is going to replace. And I think I come from this place is because, if you told the 20-something-year-old Pavan that, hey, you're going to be running a B2C electricity company in 20 years' time that's serving, thousands of New Zealanders, tens of thousands of New Zealanders, I wouldn't have believed it. So someone's taken a chance on me, and it's only my place now to give other people a chance to prove themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing what you just said, which is at the end of the day, even after you've done your procedural diligence on the people you're trying to bring on board, and they on you, because it is a two-way street. They're both parties are buyers on the table and both are sellers on the table. I think, and unfortunately we only have hours, not days, weeks, months, internships aside, to make that judgment call, right? Which is, okay, I like Pavan and I like what his vision is, and he feels, as you use, being open and honest, and I like what he's saying. And then you with the candidate, but you're still taking a chance. It is a bit of a chance, and it's a belief system. And taking that chance, as you said, people took a chance on us, and that's always what it's going to come down to. How do you balance? At what point do you decide that the person sitting across from you in the process, having looked at a lot of people, you narrowed it down to one or two people, let's say two. How do you decide who you're going to take a chance on? What's that final two or three things in your mind, that calculus that says, that's the person that I'm going to take a chance on?
Yeah, good question. And I'm going to offer up a process that I've run quite successfully about 6 or 7 times in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
This is for senior hires that I've used for, but I've seen others take this process and use it themselves. And I call it the reverse interview process. So let's say if I'm hiring a C-suite that is going to be working in my leadership team, I will work with my leadership team to create a little challenge which tests this individual on their thinking, their planning, their presentation skills, their ability to work in a team, because it's important to me that they work well with my team. And then I will issue this challenge to the final 2 or 3 candidates. And I'll tell them, okay, you've met me 2 or 3 times already. You've asked me all the questions. But to do this challenge, I'm going to make 15 to 30 minutes available of all of my leadership team. So you get to ask them questions. And then you come into the next leadership team meeting, which is next week. And then you work with us and present your findings and tell us how you're going to solve this problem. And generally, it's a live problem in the company, which is key to this role succeeding. And through that process, I'm testing, can they solve a live problem relevant to us? Can they work with my team? Can they present? Can they own the stage? Because as a leader, you need to do that sometimes. And ultimately, can they sell me their solution?
Yeah.
Because they're the CEO, that's what you're looking for. And so many times when I've used this technique, after the first couple of interviews with me alone, in my head, I have a mental map of who's my 1, 2, 3, 4 preferred. Mm-hmm. So many times it flips.
Yeah.
And that's because this process gives the opportunity for the real person to step up of the drudgery of that interview process, which is, so the old school salespeople in the process who do really well in those tough interviews actually sometimes are found out.
Yeah.
And it's actually a fun exercise. And also my team is bought into it, that they've got to say they've met the person as well. So, and the person does come and join us to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I love it. I think so. In my book, I call it case study. I mean, I use that word because it's easy to remember, but I think it's actually case study, project, whatever you want to call it. I completely agree with you. It is such a meaningful and wonderful way of having all parties engage. And it is that diligence process, because also in the process, the candidates get to not just learn about the problem, but also, as you say, interact with your team members, and they get to feel for, oh, do I enjoy talking to, so and so on the team, and how easy or hard was it to extract information? So there's a duality of this that is beautiful, because all people involved, it just, in a world with limited time, you can improve the richness of your interactions. And I think so that the overall product of short time with good quality and richness of interaction leads to a much more effective and efficient, outcome for everyone involved. And I think that's what I love about what you're saying. And also, I think to your point, you can only do it similar to you. I think you can only do it for a handful of people at the end, because otherwise your team will be involved in interviewing the whole time. And also, I think it is an onerous task, right? It is not I'm assuming the challenge that you're giving them is not a simple 30, 40, 50-minute exercise. So it does require people who may already have jobs, who are otherwise employed, to find and carve out time to do this, which speaks to their excitement. You can test a little bit of that, their willingness, the motivation to come join your team. And that's also, as you said, often somebody who may be really good during conversational interviews may not be as interested in doing the work and rolling up their sleeves, especially when they're like, I've had people say, well, I'm doing free work for you. And I think that mindset is, there's a lot of stuff we do where not everything we do will result in a reward immediately. And so that sort of short-term thinking versus long. So there's a lot you can extract from it. Would you not agree with that?
Absolutely. And is it free work or is it pre-work for your new role, right? Like a lot of the time it's that. And the other insight is it answers the question, do we need this person now? Are they the right fit for us now? So in the last time I did this, we had 2 out of the last 3. We could have hired them both. They were both lovely people. Yeah. And we actually felt back to, they could both fit in this team. They could both deliver the goods, but which one does our team out there or on the shop floor need now? And we went with a slightly different fit. Interesting. And it sometimes breaks that tiebreaker.
One thing you said earlier is that you hire for culture and fit often over capability. And so in a world where you obviously need the capability, and just to clarify for those listening, you're saying that once you've identified the people who can do the job, of the people who you think are capable, in this example of 2 people, and I'm not saying that's why you hired them, but is that what you mean, that once you've done your work and diligence and run through the process, if you're lucky enough to have multiple people left at the end who are equally good, then you hire for culture? Is that what you meant? Or do you first look for cultural fit and then do the capability fit?
Yeah, I mean, the cultural fit piece is really hard to shake, right? Because it's really core to what makes us individual and distinct. And there's no right or wrong answer there. And I feel like the capability side of things is it's still difficult, but it's a lot less difficult to nurture and build. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to get the fit, and the cultural fit. So I tend to get my long list down to a short list based on the cultural side. And does this person excite me? Will they excite my people and my customers? As long as, largely speaking, you're not trying to put around a square peg in a round hole. Yeah. There'll be something about this person based on their resume or someone who might recommend them to us. There must be something about them that they've been drawn to this role. And that's where you kind of your quick shortlisting or a process is important, particularly if you're hiring senior roles. You might have other advisors that are helping you do that.
Yeah, no, the reason I asked that question is because in small, medium businesses, you have smaller teams, and the impact that one person, especially for senior roles, can be tremendous. And so, right, lots to gain, a lot to lose depending on the call you make. And ultimately, while it is a team effort, ultimately the decision and how you shape is on your shoulders as a CEO. And so that's why I was sort of curious that when you have you obviously are also building a culture within your team, right? Like a culture that you enjoy. And I think I'll use your word, which I like better, which is excite. And I think that excite you, finding people who could excite you. Again, it goes back to you taking a chance on someone, but you've got to do your diligence to figure that out. What kind of questions do you normally ask if you have one or two that test or tease apart the cultural fit aspect that as it relates to the culture you're building? Like what types of things do you usually ask them? And also at what point in their journey with you in the process do you figure that out?
Yeah, a simple question that I often ask, and it depends when I ask it, but I do ask it, is what drives you? It's a very simple question, and people have answered it, 100 different ways. Some really fall back on their a specific childhood experience that has stayed with them and has they've leaned back on over and over again to drive them forward. Others talk about a particular long-term goal of theirs that they have, which they're chipping away at, So ultimately what I'm asking for is, in your answer, can I dig into attributes of the type of environment that will propel you forward? And do we have those environments here so that you can be your most successful self? That's ultimately what I'm asking. Yeah. And that's been for me a number of times a way which allows me to tick the excitement box as well.
Yeah.
Because it's so much easier working with people that are excited about something, right? Because then as a leader, you just got to channel that energy a little bit more. And back to your other question, which was, hiring for fit. I'd love everyone listening to have a think about every time they've actually, managed someone out of their team or let go of someone from their team. It's not usually because of their capabilities are lacking. It's because actually there is a massive cultural gap, right? So if you don't get this right, it's a lot more expensive to get it right later on.
Yeah. I think that's so true. But it's hard to get it right, which is why people who are able to build amazing teams, it's not an easy job. And that's part of the reason and the ethos of this work that I'm doing is to help smaller companies, because small, medium businesses have the day job and that hand-to-hand fight that they've got to put up all the time, every day. You wake up and, things have shifted, sometimes for the good, but often you're in this problem-solving mode. And so what simple tools and questions and processes they can follow and adapt, that just builds that team that makes, ultimately every business started with a vision of some problem that they were trying to solve, that they can go back to, doing that so they can actually deliver a product or a service to those that they feel will be best served by it. And I think this is an enabling process, which is actually needed. And the better and simpler it can be, the more fun everything else will become. And I think that's really what it is. And again, I like the word excite. One last question on process is, one of the things with your team getting involved in the process, which I believe in terms of, especially when you're doing the challenge, how do you as a group then come to a decision? Is it a consensus-based decision-making? Is it more that everyone provides their input and ultimately it's your vote that matters? How do you solve that? Because a lot of businesses find that a bit interesting to manage, especially founder-led businesses, which I know in your case it's not today, but you've been there. And so how have you solved for that?
Yeah, and a really good question. I think there's two parts to the question. Firstly, how do we make decisions? And we're going on a journey at the moment. My leadership team, including myself in this company, is quite new. And the way we are thinking about it is every decision, not only at the exec level, but at all levels in the company, has a type, right? Is it a we decision? Is it a you decision? Or is it a me decision? And if someone suggests we need to make a particular decision, let's say in this case, a hiring decision, that person has to make it very clear what they think is one of the three types of decisions. So if it's a me decision, it's signaling, hey, this is my decision. It sits with me, but I'm getting your input, whether it be specific data that belongs in your area. So you need to go and crunch some data to give it to me, or your opinion, right? But ultimately, I'll weigh all those things up and I'll make a decision. If it's a we decision, it's a consensus decision. And it could be a number of reasons why leadership teams need to have a consensus decision, because it actually everyone's viewpoints are equally important. And those are the most toughest, and they take the longest, right?
Yeah.
And you actually need to always remind yourself the moment you leave the room, if you didn't agree with it, you got to own it, and we'll stick by the message so all of our team understand that it's their decision that we made. And if it's a you decision, then like I can equally say, hey, I think we as a company need to make a decision about this thing. Doesn't sit with me. It sits with person X. Can you please go make that decision? And I've actually delegated all responsibility for that decision. And that person knows very clearly I've got their back. Doesn't matter which way they go, left, right, or straight, right? And what we've done, so that's one, let's figure out the type of decision. And the other thing we are creating to communicate to the whole company is analogy of a tree, right? So a tree has roots, trunk, branches, and leaves, very simply speaking. And some decisions will be at the root level. What's our company name? What is our vision? What is our values? What's our capital requirements? And how do we broach those? And those decisions sit with the CEO and the board. The trunk decisions sit with the senior leadership team. The branch decision sits with other leaders in the company. And then the leaves are everybody, right? Depending on what branch the leaf sits on. And we're trying to bring this to life, this tree to life, so that we're telling our people, hey, these hundreds of decisions that we are making as a company every day, most of them sit in the leaf land, and it's up to you to make them. And you have our support and we have your backs. And that way it creates an agile organism where things are not always coming up to the CEO to make a decision. Actually, I should be making the least number of decisions in the company. And when I do make one, it should create value 2 or 3 years in the future, right? I borrowed that from Jeff Bezos, by the way.
Well, we'll tag him in this interview to give him credit. I love it. I love the analogy. I love the principle and the spirit behind it. I think it also is a very beautiful way of visualizing, because a flourishing tree then sort of says, it's got to work end to end, and so while there's so much that you can do, and I will do it injustice by trying to talk about how the actual tree works, but I think people get it, which is, there's connectivity from the leaf all the way down to the roots and vice versa. Every part needs the other part, and everyone's got to play their own part. And so bringing that clarity, but then overlaying the we, you, me framework that you brought up, I think then within each of those components, you can still have the we, you, me, right? And so not every piece has to be alone, but you can operate. So it's a very beautiful way of thinking. And I think what it also does, Pavan, for me, as I think about if I'm sort of projecting myself to be a member of your team, is that I can imagine a place where it drives clarity for the team members, but it also drives cohesion, right? Because now we're all operating from the same manual, as opposed to, I don't know what our framework is of decision-making, of ownership, of accountability, and it all sort of flows really nicely with it. Often I've seen in small businesses that scale very rapidly it's amazing that it's scaling. Everyone's hustling and working really hard, but the fundamentals of how we make decisions, who makes decisions, when do we make decisions, what information do we need to make decisions, just gets out of hand. And it's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. It's amazing that companies go quickly, but to be able to allow for this type of a framework be embedded early on just makes that scalability a lot more productive and a lot more easier. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I would imagine that's really helped you scale companies quicker as well. It's not, people think process will slow you down, but something like this actually might help you accelerate as opposed to slow you down. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, the other rule of thumb with scaling that I have to offer up is like when you go through these scaling points, you're actually building a new company and you're trying to figure out which people, processes, systems, and partners are going to come with you on the journey to the next stage. And some of these frameworks might not be suitable for a slightly bigger company. So I think process within a particular scale point is really important to think about, and to being deliberate about breaking it when you get to the next scale point is some, like when we went from, in my previous role, went from a single digit million company to a double digit revenue million company. We had to basically reinvent ourselves in its entire stack, including which customers are we going to keep and which customers are we going to fire, down to actually how do we operate and how do we manage our leadership team.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That I think it's the reinvention is a good word, because I think a lot of people do it naturally, instinctively, but to do it consciously is what your counsel is. Like, be conscious about how and when that happens, and therefore what other things around you that are supporting that reinvention and beyond the next journey have to evolve a bit more to support that next wave of growth. I know we're running out of time, but maybe if you can leave our listeners with one simple question, 2 parts. When you think about people and think about talent development, acquisition, building companies, what is the one thing that you would coach, counsel, advise, suggest, you pick your favorite word, that companies don't do? Please avoid that. And one that please absolutely do, because that will serve them really well. What would the do and don't, if you had to pick one each, what would they be?
Do is invest in your people and culture teams well in advance of what you think you'll need them by. So as an example, let's say if a company thinks, oh, shall we go hire a chief people officer? Shall we build out our HR team or people team? And then they say, well, actually, we only have 30 or 40 people. Well, why would we be doing that at this stage? No, actually do it at this stage, because by the time we get to 100 people, they'll have all the people processes and guides and culture frameworks and leadership development pathways and all of those things that break in the people area, they would have sussed it out. And when things break in the people area, you lose people, and it's harder to turn them around. And, replacing someone is way more expensive than actually working with them to make it a great place to work, right? So invest in your people team as a, OPEX or overhead item. I know sometimes it's difficult to do, but invest in that early. And the don't do thing is, I believe a lot of companies don't think about the macro talent or people problems that are affecting their industry and don't affect change at that macro level early enough or deliberately rather. And one example is, in New Zealand, as you pointed out earlier in the conversation, we are very isolated, very small talent pool, particularly from a tech sphere perspective, right? And yet we have certain groups in society, Maori and Pacifica and immigrant workforces who don't index in tech as high as they should. So one thing I encourage all companies that I'm part of to do is go and engage with communities that could actually be an and to the talent problem, right? And one thing I do personally is I work with a charity as a founding director the charity is called Take Two, and we are helping incarcerated individuals, so people that are in prison, become software engineers whilst they're in the inside. And through that, we're trying to demonstrate that not only we can turn these people's lives around and give them a whole new worldview on what's possible, but it impacts that cycle that they're stuck in and their family stuck in. And actually, it shows the rest of your talent pool that what's possible, right? So that so that they can convert more people to being software engineers, as an example. Yeah. So be a bit more deliberate at the macro, the systems level of whatever the talent problem you might be having, rather than just be focused on your company. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think you're both of those make sense. I think do has almost a couple of different nuances. One is obviously investing in your teams and your people processes early, so it'll serve you better downstream, even though, you might actually take a little bit of it's genuinely both cost and time investment, potentially slightly earlier than what you would otherwise think about. But also I think in the same spirit is get talent sooner into your system. Part of you bringing chief people officer is not just the investment, but also bringing that talent inside to build, because with that comes more focused, dedicated thinking around it in that example. So hiring ahead of the curve is also, before you get to the problem, perhaps also would serve some companies, which often gets tricky as well. But I think if you can, I think it will, in the again, it's a long-term view rather than the short-term view. But I do agree with on the don't, which is a really interesting point about thinking about the macro conditions around you, especially as it relates to talent. Like what else could you be doing? Because the other flip side of it that I've also seen is, when people or companies start to really offer up things to talent and they shift the market, and whether it's compensation, whether it's titles, whether it is, perks, whatever it is, and that's not sustainable. What it definitely does, it actually creates a negative impact for the rest of the macro community, because then they're like, well, not everyone's going to be able to keep up with it. And so just be mindful. Yes, you've got to think about your own business, but both in terms of what the community offers and the impact you can have on the community, there's duality to it. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts and ideas with us and everyone listening. I really appreciate your time. Super excited to see everything you've achieved. Congratulations, and can't wait to hear more about what you get up to in this new role, which I know is going to be pretty exciting and obviously is going to have an impact on a lot of people. It already is happening a lot of impact, and will continue to impact more people as you scale up. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Rohit. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of the People Quotient podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to give us a like and invite your friends and colleagues to join us in this community. Until next time, stay focused on your people. Signing off, Rohit Bassi.